It's a strange and sometimes exhausting thing to see how easily some people push boundaries without a second thought. Those subtle digs or interruptions, the way they brush off your time or feelings like they don't matter, almost like it's second nature to them. And there you are, trying to hold your ground, but sometimes it feels like the world expects you to just grin and bear it. Well, what if you didn't? What if instead of smiling through it or snapping back, you stood still in the middle of the storm, completely unfazed? Imagine this. Someone takes a swipe at you, throws out a passive-aggressive comment dripping with condescension, fully expecting to pull you into their chaos. What if, instead of biting, you just stopped? Not a word, not a twitch, just a calm, steady gaze that pierces through all their noise. It's disarming, almost eerie in its calmness, because in that silence, you're holding up a mirror to them, a reflection of their own actions, laid bare without the cushion of a defensive reaction. They're left staring at themselves, not the drama they hope to stir. Here's the truth. People who disrespect others often thrive on the reactions they provoke. It's their fuel, the stammering, the frustrated words, the flustered expressions. Those are their trophies. So when you deny them that, when you give them nothing but silence or an unbothered stare, it shifts the balance of power. Suddenly they're the ones feeling small, unsure, exposed. It's a simple move, really, but it's so profound in its quiet defiance. I remember being in a meeting where someone couldn't stop interrupting me. Every word I said was met with a loud, overbearing comment, as if the room only existed for their monologue. At first, I tried the polite route, waiting for my turn, trying to steer the conversation back, but they wouldn't stop. So, I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms and locked eyes with them, silent, still. The seconds stretched out, heavy and awkward, until they stumbled mid-sentence, glancing around, suddenly hyper-aware of how they were coming across. That moment spoke volumes without me uttering a single word. It's not just about winning the moment. It's about redefining the dynamic, for yourself as much as for them. Because here's what happens when you don't rise to their bait. You remind yourself that their words or actions don't have to dictate how you feel or react. You reclaim your peace, your space, your sense of self-worth. That silence is not about passivity. It's an active choice, a powerful refusal to engage in something that doesn't serve you. There's a deeper beauty to this approach. People often act disrespectfully because they've never been held accountable. They've coasted through interactions, unchecked and unchallenged. But when you give them nothing, no reaction, no validation, you're forcing them to confront the emptiness of their own behavior. You're not telling them to stop. You're showing them why they should, and that's an entirely different kind of power. And it's not just about silence. It's about how you carry yourself in the face of those who test your limits. Let's talk about the way some people demand explanations for your choices, as if your decisions are a debate waiting to be dissected. They'll press you with their why and how, framing their curiosity as concern, but so often it's about judgment or control. Here's the thing. Your life doesn't require their permission. You don't owe anyone a step-by-step guide to your decisions. And the sooner you embrace that, the lighter you'll feel. I learned this the hard way when I switched to a career path that made sense to me but baffled everyone else. Questions flooded in. Why would you leave stability? How will you make it work? At first I explained myself, laying out plans, trying to reassure them, but no matter what I said, it wasn't enough. And then I realized it wasn't about me. Their questions weren't a genuine interest. They were projecting their fears onto me, so I stopped explaining. When asked, I'd simply say, because I wanted to. No further details. The silence that followed was liberating. This shift wasn't just about shutting down questions, it was about reclaiming my narrative. Every explanation I didn't offer was a statement that my life was my own, that I didn't need external validation to move forward. And here's the thing, the more I did this, the more confident I became in my choices. That's the magic of not explaining yourself. You stop wasting energy convincing others and start channeling it into living authentically. It's not always easy, though. Sometimes the best choice is the hardest, stepping back. There are people who will always push, no matter how much you've tried to set boundaries. And while it might feel harsh or cold, there's incredible power in choosing distance. Not everyone deserves a front row seat in your life, and creating space from those who disrespect you is not just an act of self-preservation, it's a declaration of self-respect. This doesn't mean cutting ties dramatically or holding grudges. It's as simple as deciding where you'll focus your energy and who gets access to it. I once had a friend who thrived on subtle jabs, always finding a way to criticize under the guise of humor. At first I brushed it off, but over time it wore me down. Eventually, I started limiting my interactions, seeing them less frequently, and every bit of distance felt like a breath of fresh air. It wasn't about hating them. It was about loving myself enough to step away from what wasn't serving me. That's the thing about distance. It's not about running away. It's about making room for growth, for peace, for people who genuinely respect you. And when you hold your head high, standing tall in the face of disrespect, you're not just protecting your space, you're setting a standard for how you deserve to be treated. Confidence, real confidence, is quiet. It's not loud or boastful. It doesn't need validation from others. It's in the way you carry yourself, the way you walk into a room as though you belong there because you do. It's in refusing to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. That kind of presence can be unsettling for people who rely on disrespect to feel powerful, but that's not your problem. You're not here to make anyone else feel big by making yourself small. Every time you choose silence over drama, distance over conflict, or confidence over insecurity, you're making a choice to live on your terms. It's a reminder to yourself and others that your worth isn't up for negotiation, that respect starts from within, and that no one else's behavior can take that away. Keep that energy. It's magnetic, transformative, and entirely yours. There's something fascinating about how silence can speak louder than words, how a simple pause in a conversation can make waves bigger than any argument ever could. It's not just about ignoring someone or refusing to engage. It's about holding your ground without ever having to explain why. Silence is the kind of power move that doesn't announce itself. It just quietly shifts the room. Imagine someone is throwing all kinds of negativity your way. Maybe it's a passive-aggressive comment dressed up as a joke, or a thinly veiled insult meant to dig at your confidence. They're waiting for you to fire back, to defend yourself, to explain why they're wrong. That's the game they want you to play. But instead, you say nothing, not a word. You let their remarks sit there, unacknowledged, hanging awkwardly in the air like a balloon with no one to catch it. Here's the thing about silence. It's not passive, it's deliberate. By choosing not to respond, you're making a statement. You're saying, I'm not here to justify myself to you. I don't owe you my energy or my emotions. And that silence, it speaks volumes. It forces them to confront their own words without the distraction of your reaction. It's like holding up a mirror they didn't ask for but desperately need. I remember a moment when this clicked for me. Someone I worked with had a knack for making underhanded remarks about everyone around them. They'd mask it as humor, always followed by a casual, "I'm just joking," as if that excused the sting. One day they turned their attention to me, throwing out a comment that was more insult than joke. Normally I would have laughed nervously or tried to explain why they were wrong, but this time I just stopped. I looked at them, completely unbothered, and didn't say a thing. The silence stretched on until they fidgeted, laughed awkwardly and muttered, "Well, you know what I mean." That was the last time they directed one of their jokes at me. It wasn't just about shutting them down, it was about reclaiming my energy. Every time you engage with disrespect, you're giving it a piece of your power. But when you meet it with silence, you're keeping that power for yourself. You're refusing to let someone else dictate how you feel or react. And that kind of restraint, that's real strength. Now let's talk about something that goes hand in hand with silence. The art of not explaining yourself. It's a hard habit to break, isn't it? We've been conditioned to think that if someone questions us, we owe them an answer. But here's the truth. You don't. Your choices are yours, and not everyone gets to weigh in on them. The need to explain ourselves often comes from a place of seeking approval. We want people to understand us, to validate our decisions, to see the reasoning behind our actions and agree with them. But the reality is, not everyone is looking to understand. Some people are just looking to challenge you, to poke holes in your confidence, to make you second-guess yourself. I used to fall into this trap all the time. If someone questioned my choices, I'd launch into a full explanation, detailing every reason behind my decision. But no matter how thorough I was, it never felt like enough. The more I explained, the more questions they'd throw at me, like they were looking for a flaw to point out. And every time, I walked away feeling drained, like I'd given too much of myself away. Then, one day, I tried something different. Someone asked me why I'd made a particular choice, one that didn't fit into their idea of what I should be doing. Instead of explaining, I simply said, "Because it felt right for me." That was it. No long-winded justification, no trying to make them understand. Just a simple, unapologetic statement. And you know what? It was liberating. When you stop explaining yourself, you're making a powerful declaration. I trust myself enough to stand by my decisions, and I don't need anyone else's approval to validate them. That confidence is magnetic, but more importantly, it's freeing. It lifts the weight of others' expectations off your shoulders and gives you the space to focus on what truly matters to you. Of course, not everyone will like this. People who are used to getting answers might push back. They might call you aloof or accuse you of being difficult. But that's their discomfort, not yours. And it's not your job to ease it. Let them sit with the silence. Let them wonder. Because here's the thing. When you stop explaining yourself, you're setting a boundary. You're saying, "This is my life, and I don't owe you access to it." This doesn't mean you never explain anything to anyone. It's about discernment, about recognizing when an explanation is warranted and when it's simply not. You'll know the difference because one feels like sharing and the other feels like defending. The next time someone questions a choice you've made, ask yourself, do I want to share this, or do I feel like I have to defend it? If it's the latter, try this. Smile, say, "It felt right for me." And let that be enough. And while we're at it, let's talk about keeping your distance. Sometimes, the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is to step back. Not everyone deserves your time, your energy, or your emotional investment. If someone consistently crosses your boundaries, if they make you feel small or drained, it's okay to take a step back. In fact, it's necessary. Distance isn't about punishment or avoidance. It's about self-preservation. It's about recognizing that your energy is precious and choosing to spend it where it's valued. It's about making space for the people and things that uplift you instead of weighing you down. And yes, it can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you've been taught to prioritize others over yourself. But once you start, you'll wonder why you didn't do it sooner. Your life is your sanctuary. Not everyone gets a key. Letting go of the guilt around distancing yourself is one of the most freeing things you can do. Because at the end of the day, Protecting your peace isn't just an act of self-care. It's an act of self-respect. It's a fascinating shift when you realize you don't owe anyone your energy, your attention, or even your presence if they don't treat you with respect. It's a kind of quiet liberation, a reclaiming of space that allows you to prioritize what truly matters. Because let's be honest, there's something deeply exhausting about keeping people close who continuously disregard your boundaries or diminish your worth. Yet society often teaches us that maintaining those connections, no matter how one-sided or draining, is the right thing to do. But is it really? There comes a point when you have to ask yourself, what am I sacrificing to keep this person in my life? My peace, my confidence, my sense of self? If the answer is yes to any of those, it's time to rethink the dynamic. And here's where it gets tricky. Sometimes the people who test your limits the most are the ones closest to you. A friend who always has a subtle critique. A family member who never quite respects your choices. A colleague who knows exactly how to push your buttons. The ties we share with these people often make it harder to create distance, but that's precisely when it becomes most important. When you start pulling back, the reactions can be telling. Some will question your shift, accuse you of being distant or unkind. They'll try to guilt you into maintaining the status quo, framing your boundaries as a betrayal of the relationship. This is when your resolve will be tested. Because choosing distance isn't about being cruel or unfeeling, it's about protecting yourself. It's about recognizing that not everyone is entitled to the same level of access to you, especially if they've shown they can't treat you with respect. I remember a friendship that felt like a one-sided effort for years. No matter how much I gave, it was never reciprocated. Instead, there were constant criticisms masked as helpful advice, moments where my time and feelings were dismissed as secondary. At first, I made excuses for it, convincing myself it wasn't that bad. But over time, the emotional toll became impossible to ignore. I'd leave our conversations feeling drained, questioning myself in ways I never had before. So, I made a decision. I started pulling back. I didn't make a big announcement or have a dramatic confrontation. I simply began to prioritize other relationships and activities that made me feel seen and valued. At first, there were questions. Why don't we hang out as much anymore? Did I do something wrong? I stayed polite but firm, keeping my boundaries intact without over-explaining. And you know what? It was one of the best decisions I've ever made. The distance gave me clarity, and in that clarity, I realized how much I'd been compromising myself to keep that friendship alive. This kind of clarity doesn't just happen with friendships. It's relevant in all areas of life, especially in how we respond to criticism. Not all criticism is bad, of course. Constructive feedback can be a powerful tool for growth, but there's a significant difference between someone who genuinely wants to help you improve and someone who uses criticism as a weapon. The latter isn't about helping you grow. It's about asserting control, making you feel small to make themselves feel bigger. So, how do you handle this kind of criticism? First, recognize it for what it is, a reflection of them, not you. People who consistently criticize often project their own insecurities onto others. They nitpick because it distracts from their own shortcomings, their own fears of inadequacy. Once you see this pattern, it becomes easier to detach from their words emotionally. I once had a coworker who had something to say about everything I did. It didn't matter if the work was solid. They'd always find a flaw, a way to frame my efforts as inadequate. At first, I bent over backward, trying to address their critiques, hoping to win their approval. But no matter what I did, the criticisms kept coming. Then, one day, it hit me. This wasn't about my work at all. It was about their need to feel superior. From that moment on, I approached their feedback differently. Instead of internalizing it, I evaluated it objectively. Was there anything useful in their comments? If yes, I used it. If not, I let it roll off my back. And when their critiques veered into unnecessary negativity, I simply stopped responding to them. I stayed calm, professional, and focused on my work. The reaction they were looking for, their criticism, started to lose their sting. This approach taught me something powerful. You don't have to engage with every opinion thrown your way. Not all feedback is worth your time, and not everyone's perspective deserves a space in your mind. When you stop letting other people's negativity dictate your mood or decisions, you reclaim control over your narrative. But let's not forget one of the simplest, yet hardest lessons of all. Hold your head high. It sounds almost cliché, doesn't it? But there's a reason this advice has stood the test of time. When you carry yourself with confidence, even in the face of disrespect, you're sending a message, not just to others, but to yourself. There's a kind of quiet power in refusing to shrink, in standing tall even when someone tries to knock you down. It's not about pretending their words or actions don't hurt. It's about choosing not to let that hurt define you. It's about walking through the world as if you already know your worth, because deep down, you do. Confidence has a way of unsettling people who rely on disrespect to feel powerful. When you don't react the way they expect, when you stand firm and unshaken, it throws them off balance. They're forced to confront the fact that their words don't have the impact they hoped for, and in that moment, their power fades. Holding your head high doesn't mean ignoring your emotions or pretending everything is fine. It means choosing to rise above, to focus on your own sense of self rather than their attempts to diminish it. And the best part? The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. Over time, their negativity barely registers, because you're too busy living in alignment with your own values, too grounded in your worth to be bothered by their attempts to bring you down. Ultimately, respect starts with you. It's in the boundaries you set, the energy you protect, the confidence you carry. And when you prioritize your self-respect, everything else, your relationships, your peace, your sense of purpose, begins to fall into place. There's a subtle but powerful transformation that happens when you decide to take control of how you let people treat you. It's not just about standing up to disrespect. It's about creating a life where your energy is protected, your boundaries are clear, and your self-worth is non-negotiable. The truth is, people will often treat you the way you allow them to, and that realization, it can feel heavy at first, but it's also incredibly freeing. Because once you see it, you understand just how much power you hold to shape your interactions and relationships. Let's talk about one of the simplest but most profound acts of self-respect, saying no. It sounds easy in theory, doesn't it? But in practice, saying no can feel impossibly hard, especially if you've been conditioned to please others, to avoid conflict, or to always be agreeable. And yet there's nothing more liberating than the moment you realize you can say no, not just to tasks or requests, but to behaviors, attitudes, and dynamics that don't serve you. Saying no doesn't always require a dramatic declaration. Sometimes it's as subtle as declining to engage in a conversation that feels toxic or refusing to entertain someone's negativity. Other times, it's more direct, like setting a boundary when someone crosses a line. And while it might feel uncomfortable at first, every no you say is a yes to yourself. It's a way of telling the world, I value my time, my peace, and my energy too much to waste them on things that don't align with who I am. I'll admit, learning to say no wasn't easy for me. There were so many times I said yes out of guilt or fear of disappointing someone, even when it left me feeling drained or resentful. But each of those moments taught me something valuable. Every time I said yes to something that didn't align with my values, I was saying no to something that did. That realization was a turning point. It made me see that saying no isn't selfish, it's essential. And here's the thing, when you start saying no, you might notice a shift in how people respond to you. Some will respect your boundaries and even admire your confidence. But others? They might push back. They'll question your decisions, try to guilt you, or accuse you of being difficult. That's when you have to remind yourself that their discomfort isn't your responsibility. Your boundaries exist for a reason, and the people who truly care about you will respect them, even if it takes time for them to adjust. Boundaries, by the way, aren't just about saying no. They're about knowing what you're willing to tolerate and communicating that clearly. It's about drawing a line and standing firm when someone tries to cross it. And let's be honest, not everyone will like your boundaries. People who are used to taking advantage of your kindness or who thrive on overstepping will often react negatively when you start setting limits. But that's not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're finally standing up for yourself. There was a time when I struggled to set boundaries because I was afraid of being seen as rude or difficult. I thought keeping the peace meant letting things slide, even when it hurt. But over time I realized that avoiding conflict wasn't creating peace. It was creating resentment. And that resentment didn't just affect my relationships, it affected me. I was carrying the weight of unresolved frustrations, and it was exhausting. The first time I set a clear boundary, it felt terrifying. My heart raced and I second-guessed myself the entire time. But when it was over, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. It was like a weight had been lifted. I realized that by setting that boundary, I wasn't being mean or selfish. I was taking care of myself. And that's the key. Boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about protecting your space, your energy, and your well-being. Of course, not all boundaries need to be spoken. Some of the most powerful boundaries are the ones you enforce silently. It's the way you choose not to respond to someone's negativity, the way you walk away from a situation that doesn't feel right, or the way you limit your time with someone who drains you. These silent boundaries are just as important as the verbal ones because they send a clear message. I value myself too much to stay in spaces that don't honor me. And as you start to set boundaries and say no more often, something incredible happens. You begin to attract people who respect you. It's like your energy shifts, and suddenly the people who thrive on disrespect or manipulation don't feel as drawn to you. Instead, you start building connections with those who value and uplift you. It's not magic, it's alignment. When you respect yourself, you set the tone for how others should treat you. But let's not ignore the fact that this journey isn't always smooth. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, moments when you feel guilty for prioritizing your needs, and moments when the pushback from others feels overwhelming. That's when you have to remember why you started. You're not setting boundaries or saying no to hurt anyone else. You're doing it to honor yourself. And that's a choice worth standing by, even when it's hard. At the core of all this is a simple but profound truth. You teach people how to treat you by how you treat yourself. If you show the world that you value your time, your energy, and your peace, others will take notice. Not everyone will adjust, and that's okay. The people who matter will respect your boundaries, and those who don't. They were never meant to have a place in your life anyway. So, hold your ground. Say no when you need to. Set boundaries and enforce them. Protect your peace with everything you've got. Because at the end of the day, the relationship you have with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship in your life. And you deserve to live in a way that reflects just how valuable you are. The most powerful realization in reclaiming your respect is this: it all starts with you. How you carry yourself, the boundaries you enforce, the energy you protect. These are the unspoken signals that teach others how to treat you. It's not about demanding respect from the world. It's about embodying it so fully that disrespect has no room to thrive. You don't need to explain your choices, justify your worth, or engage in battles that drain your energy. Silence can be a statement, distance a necessary move, and a simple no a declaration of self-worth. The people who matter will honor your boundaries. Those who don't will fall away. And that's not a loss, it's clarity. At the heart of it all, self-respect isn't about building walls. It's about cultivating a life where your energy is valued, your peace is sacred, and your presence is intentional. Respect yourself fiercely, and the world will follow.